Hey everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil Week 56. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am joined this morning by my co-host Andrew Smith. And before I introduce our very special guest, let me run through the numbers for you. Today is 3,525 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange, 479 days since the WikiLeaks founder and publisher was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion IMF loan, 43 days until the second phase of Julian's show trial and rendition hearing is set to begin at the Old Bailey in London. Today is 1,156 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. On the plus side, it is 141 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning, who is streaming on Twitch Thursday through Sunday from 7 to 11 p.m. East Coast time. So if you can, jump on Twitch and say hello to Chelsea and send her some love. We do have a GoFundMe up right now. We are crowdfunding and trying to get back to we are going back to Washington, D.C. To cover and to raise a bunch of hell during the 3 weeks that are set aside for Julian's hearing. We have several impactful, high-profile demonstrations planned. We could really use you guys' support and help to get us all the way to our goal. I want to thank each and every one of you who's donated so far. We've been able to secure our lodgings, which is ridiculously expensive. So thank you. Thank you. And with no further delay, please welcome to the Free Assange Vigil for the first time, just an incredible investigative journalist and tenacious individual, someone that we all admire very much, Stefania Maurizi. How are you? I guess it's evening where you are. How are you?
Yes, all is well, Steve, and thank you for this invitation. And here it's very hot and sticky, but it's a pleasure to discuss the Assange case with you and everyone listening to our conversation.
I got roasted out at work this week. It was I live in like the central coast of California, which I'm told is very much like parts of Italy.
Yeah.
And man, I made the mistake of going to work in a tank top. So now I have like tank top tan lines, except for they're not tan lines. It's like blistering sunburn and then pasty white skin. Looks fantastic. It really does. I'm killing it. I am. Stefania, we wanted to have you on because you have done it seems like you're one of the very few people doing the necessary work regarding freedom of information requests and freedom of information law. And I was hoping you would be able to talk to our audience about what that process has been like and how it relates to getting information out about Julian's case.
Yes, absolutely, Steve. So you have to realize that, first of all, the first time I started working on the documents, on the secret documents published by WikiLeaks, it was 11 years ago in 2009. And I worked on all their documents, and I immediately realized the huge risks that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were running for publishing these secret documents. I have been a journalist, an investigative journalist for the last 14 years. I work on many different kinds of investigations. So I realized that from the very beginning that what Julian and the WikiLeaks journalists were publishing was extremely risky because they were revealing documents about what I call the secret power, the hidden power. Basically, is a level, the highest level of power. You usually don't see exposed as they do, because you maybe can read some reports on what the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon do, but you don't have a media organization exposing this highest level of power continuously and for years, for more than a decade, and publishing secret documents about the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the CIA, the NSA, and things like that. So as soon as I started working on these documents, I realized the huge risks they were running, both legal risks and also the extrajudicial risks, because these are people who basically can get you disappear in the middle of the day, of the night. So, it's extremely risky to publish continuously for a decade this kind of documents. So due to this work, back in 2015, I realized that no one had tried to get the documents about the case. So no one had tried to get the documents about the Julian Assange case. He had been under investigation since 2010. And no one had tried to get the documents to try to understand what was going on in Sweden, what was going on in other countries, in the UK, and what was going on in Australia and the US. So it was at that point that I realized that it was crucial, necessary to get the documents, to get factual information about the investigation, to reconstruct the investigation factually, and to get hard evidence about what was going on. So since then, it was basically August 2015, and since then, I'm still fighting to get these documents. There are tens of thousands of documents. I know for sure that there are tens of thousands of documents about this case, because the UK authorities, during our litigation before the London tribunal, were basically forced to provide an estimate of how many documents they had about this case. So they admitted that between 2010 and 2015, they had at least something like 7,200 and 9,600 pages of correspondence just with Sweden. Then you can imagine how many pages with the US, how many pages probably with the Australian authorities, how many pages with Ecuadorian authorities. So they have tens of thousands of documents, and no one tried to get these documents, and are still fighting in 4 jurisdictions, in US, in UK, Sweden, Australia, with 7 lawyers. So you can imagine how intense it is to litigate with 7 lawyers in 4 jurisdictions. And I'm still struggling to get these documents. Do you know how many documents after 5 years I got about this case?
How many?
So I got basically just 804 pages of documents from Sweden, and something like 600 pages from the UK. Nothing from the US, nothing from Australia. After 2 years, Australia still has to reply to my request for internal review of my Freedom of Information request. So I have been struggling against this rubber wall, and I'm sure they have a lot to hide, because otherwise they would never have handled a Freedom of Information request in this way. You have to realize, Steve, that basically in just 3 years, the New York Times was able, the Washington Post was able to get the files about Afghanistan. So just in 3 years. So when I read this, I thought myself, it's unbelievable. I have been fighting 5 years in 4 jurisdictions just to get some 100 pages of documents, and they have been able to get the documents about Afghanistan in just 3 years. So you have to understand how much they have to hide, considering this secrecy surrounding the case.
You know, real quick, the Washington Post was able to get those documents in 3 years because of multiple Freedom of Information Act lawsuits. And I'm not going to make any presumptions here, but I'm going to guess that you, Stefania Maurizi, don't have a war chest at your disposal where you can just constantly throw money at the Freedom of Information lawsuits like the Washington Post did. And I think that's what eventually got them over the hump in terms of being able to collect this material, was the real coin that they threw at it, which sort of it makes the process, at least here in the US, of getting Freedom of Information Act documents, one for people of means or privilege, or access to just piles and piles of cash.
Look, Steve, actually I spent thousands of euros paying lawyers for getting these documents. So I have, of course, I don't have the resources that the Washington Post has, but still have some good resources in terms of money for paying lawyers, thanks to some grants for investigative journalism. Initially, I paid myself. I paid 6,000 euros and for paying lawyers working on the case. But at the end, I realized I was unable to cover all these costs for thousands of euros. So I applied for a grant for investigative journalism. I got a good grant just to pay for lawyers, because I'm not earning any money from this work. I'm working as a journalist on all other kind of investigation, but I got this money just for the lawyers. And I put thousands of euros for paying legal fees in the UK, in Sweden, and so on. So, I mean, I think I invested a lot of resources, and yet they still refusing, and we go to the tribunal, and they keep refusing us documents with completely absurd, legal ground. So you have to realize how hard it is, how they are opposing any transparency about this case.
So with working between 4 different countries with these lawsuits, is there some countries that are easier to work with in regards to Freedom of Information Act requests, or are they all kind of as locked down as each other?
So basically, initially it was, initially I had, back in 2015, I had a good idea. And my idea was, I will apply for freedom of my information request. I will file my freedom of information request in Sweden, because they have an excellent law. They have excellent laws when it comes to freedom of information. And whatever I get from Sweden, I can use it as a picklock to litigate my freedom of information requests in other jurisdictions which are not as friendly as Sweden. And it was fine. I mean, it was a very good strategy. It worked, because initially Sweden provided me the most important documents. All we know about this case, which means the pressures from the UK authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service, telling the Swedish prosecutors, don't question Julian Assange here in London, question him only after extraditing him to Sweden. And this is not an extradition request like any other. And the fact that the Swedish prosecutors wanted to drop the case back in 2013, and also the fact that the UK Crown Prosecution Service was telling to the Swedish prosecutors, don't you get cold feet. because the Swedish prosecutors were considering to close their investigation once and for all. So all these things, all this kind of very precious, important information comes from my Swedish FOIA. And initially, the Swedish prosecutors, the Swedish authorities were fully cooperative. But then, when they realized that I was using this for litigating my FOIA, my Freedom of Information Act request in other jurisdictions like London or like Australia, like US, they stopped cooperating basically, and they started releasing me completely useless documents, completely useless.
You know, I think if I have my timeline right, the person who was running the prosecutorial service back then, 2012, 2013, that was now Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, right? Or do I have that?
Actually, Steve, he was heading the Crown Prosecution Service in those crucial years when the UK Crown Prosecution Service was telling to the Swedish prosecutors all these things. They were basically advising the Swedish prosecutors against questioning Julian Assange in London, which basically is the reason why we are in this legal and diplomatic quagmire. And all this was happening when Keir Starmer was heading the Crown Prosecution Service. At the same time, it's important to say that so far I was unable to get any document connecting Keir Starmer to the Assange case. None of the documents mention Keir Starmer at all.
So how long do you expect before you received all of the thousands of documents from all of these jurisdictions? Do you think it's something that they're going to keep this the court trials and the Freedom of Information Act litigations going as long as they can in regards to it? Or do you think eventually they may run out of uninteresting documents and have to begin turning over the incriminating ones, I guess, for lack of a better word?
I believe in the next months, important things will happen when it comes to my Freedom of Information request, because we have putting together all the things, and so we have a strategy to litigate this Freedom of Information request. So I hope in the next month I will have access to some significant documents about this case, because we are putting together a smart strategy to try to face this rubber wall, because they are denying us very important things. And this means that the documents contain important information. Otherwise, they would release them. Otherwise, they would not oppose the release of documents after 5 years and litigations all around the world in the US, UK, Sweden, Australia. In Australia, it's unbelievable. I mean, in Australia, they are they are completely killing my Freedom of Information request. They put under review for the last 2 years, and they have done absolutely nothing. So when my lawyers go to the Australian authorities and ask, what is going on? Why you haven't replied for the last 2 years? They say, oh, this is because our laws don't provide a deadline, don't request a deadline for us to reply. And we say, look, you are basically undermining an investigative work about a very crucial case which is in the public interest. And they say, okay, but we are following the Australian laws. So the worst in this case is the Australian Freedom of Information request framework, which is terrible because they are absolutely using delaying tactics. And they are using delaying tactics. Why? Because in the Australian documents, they just released me 24 pages, but in those 24 pages, there is an information which is very important. And that's why I keep fighting there.
So the thing I found most interesting about Australia is their lack of a Bill of Rights, or in the U.S. what we consider our First Amendment, or the freedom of association and publishing. Do you think that that may have something to do with the Australians delaying so much and pushing the can as far as they can go down the road, because they don't necessarily even have protections for when this information does come out, to where the media can literally just be arrested for running this type of information if it were to reach the media?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Do you think the lack of a freedom of journalism and a First Amendment in Australia could have anything to do with how they're dragging their feet?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to realize that the behavior of the Australian authorities in this Assange case have been awful. They have completely abandoned Julian Assange for 8 years. They never visited him, and they never provided any sort of assistance, as far as I know. So they completely abandoned one of their citizens, a journalist who has exposed crucial information in the public interest, revealing war crimes, revealing torture, a journalist who won some of the most important Australian journalistic prizes, and they had completely abandoned Julian Assange, and they are opposing the release of this information. Clearly, this information contains important things, otherwise they would not resist, otherwise they would not use these delaying tactics. They are the worst. I mean, not even the US is behaving as the Australian authorities. We are in court. We are I'm litigating my US freedom of information request. They are not really cooperative, but they are not even behaving like the Australian authorities. They are the worst, absolutely.
We've gotten a crash course education in the legal processes of Ecuador, Sweden, Australia, the UK, and the US just in the year and a month that we've been doing these vigils, and it is constantly surprised me that, and it probably shouldn't at this point, but it still does. It still surprises me the way in which Australia doesn't even pretend to be its own country anymore. They're like out in front with, yeah, we're a client state of the US. We're just going to run stall tactics until you give up and go away, or you throw a suitable amount of money and lawyers at this problem. And that is so far removed from what journalism is. Journalism is about, finding facts and relaying those facts and digging for information and getting that information out. And it shouldn't necessarily have to be it shouldn't be related to what is in your bank account or what is at your disposal in terms of, like, you and I shouldn't have to basically obtain a law degree just to get some documents and then write about them. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, Steve, you have to realize that for my appeal to the London Upper Tribunal, which is the appeal after the first step, I had basically what is considered the best UK lawyer for freedom of information litigation, Philip Coppell. And you have to realize, so prominent that basically the UK authorities came to the tribunal bringing the handbook authored by Philip Coppell. So, and I had that lawyer so prominent, so top level. And when I lost the case, I couldn't believe it. I mean, my lawyers were so sophisticated, so top-notch, and the UK lawyers compared to them were absolutely, modest. And I lost the case. I couldn't believe. And it was at that point that I asked myself, well, I mean, the process completely, is completely compromised. So do I want to go ahead? And I told myself, yes, I want to go ahead and I want to try again and use all sorts of strategies I can use, because I believe I cannot give up with this case, because I want the facts. And there is no other ways to get the facts that getting the documents. And since they have been resisting for the last 5 years, this means that the documents contain really compromising, really damning information, like the emails by the UK Crown Prosecution Service telling to the Swedish prosecutor, don't come here to question him. And no one understood why they were not traveling to London until I got these documents. So they basically put everything on their emails. That's why probably they don't want to release the documents. They know that these documents are tremendously relevant. Otherwise, they would just give up and release me the documents. But they put important information, crucial information about this case in their emails, in their correspondence. And that's why they don't want to release me this correspondence. And now you have to ask me, why did they put this information in their correspondence? Weren't they aware that this correspondence could be leaked or could be requested through the Freedom of Information request? And the answer here is that these people still believe that there is blanket exemption. So they believe no one will get access to these documents. Probably if someone will get access, it will be in 10 years, 20 years, or 25 years. So they wrote down these kind of things. They wrote down, please don't believe this case is dealt with as another extradition request, or don't you dare get cold feet, or don't come here to question him. They wrote down this kind of very important information, and now they don't want to release the documents because they know that these documents are really relevant.
And the mere existence of them just shows how this is a concerted global effort by the moneyed elite, specifically to be able to keep their war machine going and keep those things in the dark. Because just fighting against the lawsuits costs them an immense amount of time, an immense amount of manpower and energy, just to stop you from standing against them. Because there's probably some crazy ratio of for every dollar you spend, they have to spend X in response to it. So I just really appreciate all the work that you do to get this information out. If you had to pick one or two things that you've received from FOIA requests to say were the most important that you've gotten so far, what do you think those would be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most relevant documents were absolutely the correspondence between the UK Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish prosecutors, because that correspondence explained you why we had this kind of legal and diplomatic quagmire, which basically kept Julian Assange entrapped in London for 10 years. And that correspondence clarified what was going on. Basically, those emails clarified that it was the UK Crown Prosecution Service which was calling the shot in the Swedish case. It was telling the Swedish prosecutors how to manage the case, what to do. The investigative and legal strategy was basically prepared, was in London. And that's highly, unusual. What kind of interest the UK Crown Prosecution Service had in this case? I mean, that was a sex case, a Swedish sex case. So why did the UK Crown Prosecution Service was calling the shot? And you have to realize that this UK Crown Prosecution Service is now in charge of the extradition process, the extradition hearing. So this is the player, basically, that is in charge of the extradition of Julian Assange to the US. And now we know who they are. These people are, yes, please.
Is that hubris on the part of the UK, or is it like a psychopathy? Do they still think that they're an empire? Or, I mean, because what right does the UK Crown Prosecutorial Service have to tell Sweden how to run an investigation?
Yeah, I mean, Steve, that's an important question. I mean, that's the crux of the matter, basically. I want to discover why they were telling the Swedish prosecutors, don't come here. This is not an extradition request like any other. Don't you dare get coffee. I want to understand why they were calling the shots. Were they calling the shot because they, as you said, they feel they are an empire, or were they calling the shot because they had their correspondence with the US and the US was telling them, please do this and do that? I want to discover this, and there is no way to discover this unless I get access to the documents. You have to realize that they have refused to release me any correspondence between the UK and the US. And it was really absurd because they said, look, we won't release you correspondence between the US and UK and between the UK and Ecuador, because, you know, Ecuador might want to extradite Julian Assange. And I said, this is nonsense. This is completely stupid because Julian Assange is technically on the Ecuadorian soil, is in the embassy. So why should they extradite to Ecuador? But they were using this absurd explanation to refuse me the Ecuador-UK correspondence and the US-UK correspondence. And this correspondence is the key. So that's why I'm fighting, because probably in the UK-US correspondence, there is kind of coordination between the UK and the US from the very beginning of the case. Because, I mean, that correspondence goes back to the 2010-2015 years. So if there was no coordination, why not to release that correspondence? So probably the correspondence contains important information about US-UK coordination.
So we found out through Kim.com as well as Cassandra Fairbanks that Rick Grinnell was one of the key players in getting Julian Assange, or getting the loan from the IMF to Ecuador to get Ecuador to essentially remove, not essentially, but literally remove Julian's citizenship and asylum.
Without due process, by the way.
Without any due process. Do you think it would be at all possible to try to use the FOIA requests to get information about that specific instance and Grinnell and related associates' communications with the IMF and the nation of Ecuador and with the Trump administration?
Well, it's worth to try, you know, it's worth to try. It's always worth to try. I don't know specifically how it works, freedom of information when it comes to IMF. So I'm not sure how to reply on this because, you know, FOIA requests are specifically tailored depending on what kind of country you are dealing with. So, I mean, freedom of information request in US is one matter, in Australia is another matter, in Sweden is another matter, but it's always worth to try, you know. We don't have other tools. I mean, we just have freedom of information requests and leaks. So we either hope to our whistleblowers, a whistleblower revealing us anything from the from inside these organizations, or freedom of information requests. We don't have anything else, you know. So it is definitely worth to try.
What does it say about the relationship that nation states have with journalists, that it requires everything from lawsuits to imploring hackers to extract this information? Like, what kind of relationship does that speak to that states have with journalists?
Well, Steve, you have to realize that in the last 11 years I have worked as a media partner of WikiLeaks. I have seen all sorts of very weird situations. I mean, you have to realize that, for example, I was the only one who worked all the documents because many others just left. And the reason why I left is that, it was damaging for their careers to go ahead with this kind of work, which basically doesn't gain you any powerful friend. This is a difficult job. This is a difficult profession. You have to struggle to survive, especially in these days. So this kind of work, exposing crimes of very powerful entities, the top level of power, doesn't gain you any powerful friend. And this is why many left. Others were decent to keep doing the work, keeping a low profile, not exposing themselves. But as I said, it's not a kind of work, of journalistic work, which make you a successful journalist. If you're a successful journalist, you do different kind of things. You don't expose these guys. You maybe get them friends, or you maybe get their tips. You get spoon-fed by them, and so on. You have to realize that I work completely alone on the Podesta emails. There was no other media partner. I was the only one there, and it was really bad because if we had many media partners, we would be able to tell what was going on. I'm the only one who can tell I witnessed these kind of things, and there was no others working on the facts. Why there was no other working on the Podesta emails? No one wanted to upset the powerful Democrats or the powerful US politicians. And so they didn't want to work on this kind of files, No one worked on the CIA Vault 7. I was alone, completely alone. And it was a bit, it was a bit scary, to be honest. It was a bit scary because, it was CIA. That these are people who actually can make you disappear in the middle of the night, as I said.
Well, I really appreciate your courage in going through these, even when you have to go in them alone sometimes, because it takes that kind of courage to actually get this information out to the general public. Because WikiLeaks does a great job in collecting and allowing the information to become searchable, and then it's almost the responsibility of other journalistic institutions to then pick it up and transcribe it to the general public about what it showed. And it's similar in a way that you see the scientific community existing, because WikiLeaks does do scientific journalism, where you have the people that actually do the experiments and verify the information and put it out. And then you have the scientific communicators, so to speak, that take that complex topic and turn it into a digestible form for the public to actually be able to understand.
To be fair, I can tell you one important thing, and I really care about being very honest about this point. Actually, I didn't feel I risked anything apart my career, but as I said, I don't have a career. I'm not doing journalism. I'm not doing this profession because I want a career of big money, on powerful contacts. I believe in this profession, and I'm doing this profession as best as I can. And you have to realize that in these last 11 years I worked on these documents, I never had any trouble. I was followed in a showy way, in a very open way, as an intimidation attempt, I believe. But I was never put in prison like Julian. I was never, I was never detained, arbitrarily detained as Julian Assange. So I believe they took enormous risk and they have paid a huge price compared to me. I risk in the sense that, as I said, this work doesn't give you powerful friends. But I never got any risk of being arrested, being questioned, being put in a prison, in a high security prison, being running the risk of being extradited. So I think I have the duty to speak out because I think it is completely unacceptable, this double standard. They have paid a huge price. I'm not telling not just Julian Assange, all of them. I mean, if you take Sarah Harrison, if you take other WikiLeaks journalists, Joseph Farrell, Christine Ruffson, all of them risk very seriously. You know, I expect that if the US can extradite Julian, is finally able to extradite Julian to the US, all of them are at risk of being extradited. So I feel the duty to speak out because I feel privileged.
Sarah Harrison in particular, because she's named in that superseding indictment. And while the superseding indictment just sort of fell out of my mouth, I would like to know what your thoughts are. I guess regarding the indictment as a whole, but more specifically, Stella Morris's comments last week, where after Julie, or I guess it might have been the beginning of this week. It's all sort of running together. In terms of her fear and Julian's fear that the extradition request is going to be dropped and then refiled with an expansion of these charges that specifically criminalize Sarah Harrison's role in helping Ed Snowden get to safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this new superseding indictment, they don't mention, the US doesn't mention the Sarah Harrison or Jake Applebaum, but we all understood that they refer these acronyms refer to them. So we expect it's likely that the US is thinking about charging Sarah Harrison and Jake Applebaum for the work. I mean, and Sarah Harrison is the most exposed due to the fact that she helped Edward Snowden. You know, it's a complete scandal. You know, it's a if I think about the risk that she ran and Julian and the other WikiLeaks journalists ran for helping Edward Snowden, I'm really upset because you know, helping a source to to be safe, it is what journalists should do. It's absolutely what we should do. And we have an ethical duty and a professional duty to do this. So why do they risk? Why do they risk getting in prison for life for doing this, which is basically the quintessential duty of a journalist, you know?
Well, I think it's an assault on the entire institution of journalism itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's not, they are going after Julian, and they are going after a free press, and they have gone after whistleblowers and have criminalized getting the information, and now they're trying to criminalize publishing it. But the other thing that I feel like they're doing is they're trying to criminalize the people that support the publishers, the people that work alongside of them, that are also in a way a part of that same journalistic institution, and doing nothing but literally putting information to the public for the public interest. So I see the naming of Sarah Harrison as a way to just scare people even more, that like, we can put your name in here, we don't have to give this to the UK, so now everyone involved just has to wait to see what happens. Because
absolutely I mean, they absolutely want to crush their sources. They absolutely want to crush the WikiLeaks journalists. They want to crush everyone exposing their war crimes because they are above the law. You know, you have to realize what happened in Italy. I'm not sure whether you are confident with the information, whether you know the fact that Italy was the only country to nail the 26 US citizens, most of them CIA agents, who were responsible for the extraordinary rendition of Abu Omar. It was a Muslim cleric in Milan, and they basically kidnapped him in the middle of the street at noontime, like in the Pinochet trial, you know. So Italy was the only one which basically intercepted them, identified them, put them under trial, and basically all of them were convicted. 26 agents, 26 US nationals, most of them CIA agents. Well, you have to realize that we were able to do this, and our prosecutors were absolutely fantastic. I mean, amazing. They were able to get a final sentence. But you know what happened? Basically, the US put pressure on all politicians dealing with this extradition process. So they asked to all the top-level politicians not to forward the extradition request to the US. And 6 justice ministers refused to basically to forward the arrest warrants. So at the end of the day, these people, even if the prosecutors were able to get a final sentence, at the end of the day, these people were granted impunity, absolute impunity. You know, we had 2 presidents, not just 6 justice ministers refusing to forward the arrest warrants, but also 2 presidents of Italy granting presidential pardon to 4 CIA agents. So these people are above the law, you know. Laws doesn't work with these people. The due process, the trial, extradition, they don't belong to the world where we live. We are subjected to laws, prosecutors, arrest, extradition. They are above the law. And so you can imagine what happened when you have a media organization exposing these kind of things. I was able to expose the pressures on these justice ministers only thanks to the WikiLeaks cables, because we could imagine this kind of pressures on our justice minister. But unless we got the WikiLeaks cables, the US diplomacy cables leaked by Chelsea Manning and published by WikiLeaks, I would have been unable to provide evidence of this pressure. And the cables provide this evidence. So you can imagine how upset these people. They belong to a world where there is no justice, no laws, no prosecutors. And then you have a small media organization exposing all this, forcing people to see with this kind of situation, to read how they put pressure on 6 justice ministers, how they got the highest echelons of our government basically disrupting justice. So you can imagine how upset they are. So they don't want this kind of situation. They absolutely want to crush WikiLeaks. They absolutely want to crush their sources and whoever dare to help them, you know? So this is the first step. Actually, it's the second step, because they put in prison Chelsea Manning. She spent 8 years in prison. She tried to commit suicide 3 times, which is something unacceptable. You know, she's one of the most important journalistic sources of all times. And she was treated this way by the US, you know. Now they want to put in prison Julian for life and the full WikiLeaks organization. And of course, once you have this, everyone will be scared, terrified about touching these people, about getting some kind of accountability through journalism for these people. So it's a message. Don't you dare mess up with us, or we will kick your ass, you know?
That's 100% true. And I think it underscores just how necessary the work that you do is, the work that WikiLeaks continues to do, the work that El País has done to bring out information about UC Global. And then the gray zone for picking up where El País started and continuing to examine just how nightmarish. I'm struggling to find a good adjective for the depravity that UC Global, the CIA, Lenin Moreno's administration, and the Trump administration and Sheldon Adelson have all just they've sort of come together to do this like special hug of dictatorship. And it how important, Stefania, will the Spanish case against David Morales and UC Global be to the, if not the hearing in September, but to I imagine an appeals case or an actual criminal court case in the United States?
Well, Steve, I believe it is really important because you cannot have a fair trial when you realize that the lawyers had been spied on, and basically the U.S. potentially knows the full investigative legal strategy. How can you have a legal fair trial in these conditions? You cannot have. And we don't know how they use this kind of information. I mean, I was inside the embassy and my phones were unscrewed, completely unscrewed. So I still have to get some crucial information about this case because I'm one of the victims and they knew I was a journalist. So they were fully aware they were accessing my records, my devices and so on. So I believe this Spanish case is absolutely crucial. So we absolutely have to investigate what was going on, who was doing what, because as far as we know, we have some details about UC Globals, about the US intelligence, but we still don't have the full picture in court. So I'm very interested in having access to the full picture and the full investigation, because of course the Spanish prosecutors have access to interceptions, have access to search and seize warrants and so on. So it's not just it's a very deep investigation. That's why I'm really interested. And as a victim, I want to know whether they access my files, because I had very important files in my devices. I had encrypted them, but I don't know whether they were able to bypass encryption and to access that kind of information I had.
Oh, dead air. So with this, I don't want to spend too much time on UC Global. I don't know how much time we have left with you. It's been about an hour, and a fascinating one at that. But I'm curious as to what your areas of focus are going to be over the next month leading up to this rendition show trial, mockery of rule of law, where actual kangaroos would be more fair and impartial than Vanessa Baratzer. What are you going to be concentrating on in the next 35, 40 days?
So first of all, I want to follow up the case, the extradition hearing, because it seems to me the UK authorities are doing all they can to have as less journalists as possible following the hearing and reporting so that the public understand what is really going on. I mean, there is very little coverage and people don't even realize why he's getting extradited. Maybe they think he's a hacker, so it's about hacking, or it's about Russia, it's about all sorts of disinformation campaign we have seen in the last decade. So the first step for me is to follow the case, report on it, and doing this, it's very hard. I mean, you have to realize that in the last month, since February, I was able to follow the case just in February because I was in London, of course, and the 1st of June because the UK authorities provided a video link access. As for the rest of the hearing, it was a disaster. I had to dial in and the audio was terrible. And I was asking for credentials. I didn't get access to until the last minutes. And it was almost impossible to understand what was going on. So I was able to, to follow the case only thanks to Twitter and colleagues, in a few colleagues in London tweeting about it. So this is a scandal. I mean, it's the most important press case after Daniel Ellsberg, you know, and the Pentagon Papers. I mean, this case will decide the future of journalism. I mean, I have no doubt about it. I mean, this case will decide whether we are allowed to reveal state secrets on a regular basis for exposing war crimes and torture, and whether we have the right of doing this without ending our life in prison, ending in prison for life. So this case is absolutely crucial, and I want to make sure I'm able to follow it properly, because it seems to me that the UK authorities are doing all they can to make our life impossible, you know. I protested. I sent an email telling them, look, it's impossible to follow the case. Why don't you make video link available to all journalists so that we can... They didn't even reply, you know. They didn't even reply. It's scandalous.
Well, and I think on top of that, the shuttering of the doors to Australia's only news outlet that had been covering Julian's case over the last several months is kind of a I don't know, a harbinger of things to come. You know, Marty Silk, who recently just blocked me on Twitter. I don't even know why. But he had tweeted out, I think yesterday, that that he was no longer going to be stationed in London and working for the outlet there, his outlet. And the fact that they decided to close the doors that had been, you know, open and running for, I believe, 85 or 88 years, just a month before this this show trial, it's to me it says that the Five Eyes Global Intelligence Sharing Network is going to do everything that they can to have a media blackout over this hearing. And I'm the kind of person to where, you know, when I recognize something like this is going to happen, that makes me get louder. It makes me want to find out more and want to share everything that I have found about this. But it is it seems to be sort of a grim foreshadowing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe it's a scandal that we don't have basically the New York Times covering the case at all, just tiny bits. We have seen their campaign for the Russiagate. They run articles and articles and articles. Now that there is this extradition hearing, there is no coverage from the big US newspapers, and yet all of them were working on the documents. All of them took advantage of this information for their careers and scoops and editorial work. So it's a complete, absolute scandal, in my opinion. And of course, this is what the UK and US authorities want. They absolutely want that there are as little as possible mainstream media. They are fine whether they are okay for them. It's fine whether they have independent outlets, but they absolutely want to have as little as possible mainstream, big newspapers, and so on. And they are using these I believe they are using these tactics. I mean, it's a very complex, very difficult to to follow the case dialing in. You know, I have been following the case for the last 10 years, and when I dial in, I get so little. You can imagine reporters who would never work on this case, or maybe work randomly on this case, how difficult it is, you know?
Absolutely, because we get reports I've seen multiple times of people from outside of the UK trying to call in and getting absolutely nothing, where the line answers and they just can't hear a thing from the other side.
And
I
even
really-
when you get the credential, you cannot hear because the audio is terrible. You know, there are background noises and all sorts of technical problems.
So I really appreciate you joining us, Stefania. If you
Thanks to you.
could you offer people a couple of final thoughts and let them know where they can find you and your wonderful body of work?
First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss the case, and I want to tell people that we absolutely need people focus on this case, because you know it's we have to be able to pierce the rubber wall, because they absolutely don't want to have us on this case. They absolutely want to have a low profile debate, as low as possible. So unless people wake up and start following the case, and start following the few journalists working on the case, and start pushing the big newspapers, the TV and so on, covering this case, it will be a disaster, you know, it will be an absolute disaster.
Absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to give
Yeah.
people easier access to information about Julian, because it is
Yeah.
so hard to find and you can never really trust a source. So we try to do the best we can to bring people like you on that can share direct experience with the information and actually going in and trying to defend Julian in a way by gaining access with these Freedom of Information Act requests to
Absolutely,
the
because you
circuits.
know they have spent 10 years destroying this guy, 10 years telling people that he was a rapist, he was a Russian asset. So people is so confused, and now we have this extradition case, one of the worst times, with this COVID crisis, health crisis, economical crisis. So it will be very easy for the US and UK authorities to have people distracted and busy with all sorts of matters. So it is imperative, it's absolutely important that we keep the focus on the case.
Well, Stefania, where can people find the bulk of your work?
Well, of course, whenever I write an important investigation, I publish it in Italian and in English as well, so that people can access it. A lot of information is available on from my Twitter profile. You can access my personal information and my my investigations, and many of them are available in English. And whenever I publish new articles and investigation on the case, I make them available in English. So I suggest people keeping an eye on my Twitter profile, because they can easily get updates about whatever new investigation I publish.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again. This is this has been incredibly informative, and you are one of the handful of people that have so thoroughly and tenaciously and up to this point, you know, successfully been able to to get this information out. And yeah, it's this hour just flew by. So again, yeah, just from me personally, thank you very much for taking the
Thanks to
time
you.
out of your day to be here with us. At least on my channel, the chat has been very, very impressed and supportive. Is there a way that people can donate to you, like directly, to help support your journalism?
Oh, thanks. Fortunately, I work for mainstream newspaper, so I get my work paid by my newspaper, not the freedom of information requests and litigation. That basically has been very tricky. Initially, I paid myself. I believe in the future I might need some help from people who appreciate my investigation based on freedom of information requests. So if I need anything, I will ask for help because I have been doing this work completely for free. As I said, I'm paid by my newspaper. My newspaper is not supporting this freedom of information request. At the same time, they support my work because they allowed me to publish my investigation. They are collaborative from this point of view. So if in the future I need some donation to support my legal fees for this freedom of information litigation, I will definitely ask people for some support, and I would be grateful for any support, of course.
Yeah, let us know. One of the things that we do frequently on the Action for Assange website is put up like GoFundMe's or crowdfunding campaigns for whistleblowers, for journalists, for people who are out there doing the work and putting their personal safety and liberty on the line for the truth. So
Yeah,
we will be happy to help you in whatever way we can.
thank you so much. Thank you for everything, for your interest and support.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
at that, we can move to the news section of the show. I don't know where you want to start, Andre, but I think the consortium news article would be a good place to begin because it's incredibly relevant to what we've been discussing with Stefania.
I real quick, we had a question in the A4A chat. Who do you feel has made the greatest effort in embarrassing Donald Trump and Boris Johnson into doing the right thing and freeing Julian Assange immediately? Um, I would say Cassandra Fairbanks has done quite a wonderful job in exposing the way that essentially Donald Trump was using the administrative leverage he had from the German embassy and the German ambassador to get the International Monetary Loan Fund sent to the nation of Ecuador. I think another person that has done great work is Kim.com in showing how there was a back channel set up between Donald Trump and Julian Assange with Dana Rohrabacher, where essentially Trump was demanding that Julian should um, basically come forward and say that Seth Rich was the source. And this was a few months after he was already on already in the news saying, hey, we have $20,000 for anyone with information about Seth Rich's murder. And then I would say us, we've done a pretty good job. We had a really targeted action a couple weeks ago where we were getting people to message the different Mexican consulates around the world, specifically to get President AMLO, if I pronounce his name correctly, to talk to Donald Trump about Julian Assange, because he had released a statement of support about Julian about a year before from pressure by the trade unions, and this was specifically a trade agreement. So we tried to kind of bridge multiple issues and be able to have AMLO bring that conversation up, or at least think about talking to Trump about it. So those off the top of my head, without trying to dig into anything, those are the ones that that I can think of. I don't know if you have any others, Steve.
Personally, I don't think you can embarrass a sociopath
No.
or shame a sociopath.
You could just make them angry and get them to attack you.
You can get petulant reactions out of them, but if you threaten their job, and their job is supposed to be determined on a vote, then I think that can be successful. I don't. The way that it's set up right now, where it's Trump versus Biden, and will be Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer, you're looking at a similar situation to what Julian described in 2016, when the one time he did comment on the election, where it's cholera versus syphilis. And there's no, there not really a bright side to electoral politics. It's direct action, and direct action that is based off of fearless and accurate journalism that will move the bar on this, and nothing else, in my opinion.
No, I agree, and that type of direct action and that type of journalism is what predicated and moved the Black Lives Matter movement to where it is. And it's like Julian said, it's not the cop's word versus the person's friend. It's the video of what happened and people having the ability to make their own decision. And I think that applies the same whether you're talking about a social movement to end police injustice and inequality, or talking about exposing war crimes internationally by a group of capitalistic war criminals. So I think no matter what your activism is based on, it has to be predicated around making sure all factual information can come out, regardless of if it's something that politically benefits you or not. But we have this consortium news article here to start digging into. Do you want to get that going, Steve?
I do, and I'm not even muted. That's helpful. So Mark Curtis and Matt Kennard have their piece that was in Declassified UK has been republished by Consortium News. Consortium News, obviously, friends of the Free Assange Vigil, and at least half of their live team has been on my show. So let's jump into this real quick. Declassified UK has discovered that Julian Assange's judge, Vanessa Breitzer, has ordered extradition in 96% of the cases she has presided over for which information is publicly available. I'm going to jump around here a lot throughout the article, just because it's fairly extensive, and try and get to the pertinent bits. Declassified recently revealed that Assange is one of just 2 of the 797 inmates in Belmarsh being held for ostensibly violating bail conditions. Over 20% of inmates are held for murder. Now, Julian's, this is me editorializing, I'm not reading off the screen right now, but Julian's bail sentence was done in September of last year. So nearly a year has passed that he has simply been held as a remand prisoner. No charges whatsoever are keeping him incarcerated. He is purely a political prisoner at this point. Declassified has also seen evidence that the UK's Home Office is blocking the release of information about Home Secretary Priti Patel's role in the extradition case. So here's where it gets just blatantly obvious that the UK is doing everything in their power to squash information, not only about Julian's case, but about the magistrate and her record. A request under the Freedom of Information Act was sent by Declassified to the Ministry of Justice on February 28, 2020, requesting a list of all the cases on which Breitzer has ruled since she was appointed in 2011. The MOJ noted in response that it was obliged to send a reply within 20 working days. 2 months later, an information officer at the Courts and Tribunal Service responded that it could confirm that it held some of the information you requested. But the request was rejected since the officer claimed it was not consistent with the Constitutional Reform Act. This is the quote, the direct quote from the Ministry of Justice. The judiciary is not a public body for the purposes of Freedom of Information Act, and requests asking to disclose all the cases a named judge ruled on are therefore outside of the scope of FOIA. A British barrister who wished to remain anonymous, but who is not involved with the Assange case, told Declassified, the resistance to disclosure here is curious. A court is a public authority for the purposes of the Human Rights Act, and a judge is an officer of the court. It is therefore more than surprising that the first refusal argued that, for the purposes of the FOIA, there is no public body here subject to disclosure. The alternative argument on data doesn't stack up. A court acts in public. There is no default anonymity of the names of cases unless children are involved or other certain limited circumstances, nor the judges who rule them. Justice has to be seen to be done. So what Curtis and Kennard did was in April, they sent an identical request asking for a case list for a different district judge, Justin Barron, who was appointed on the same day as Breitzer in October 2011. This request was answered by the MOJ swiftly, within 17 days compared to the 2 months with Breitzer. The information officer also noted that it holds all the information you requested rather than the sum in the case of Breitzer. It is unclear why the HM Courts and Tribunal Service would hold only partial information on Breitzer but not on Barron. On this occasion, the request was not blocked. Instead, the information officer asked for further clarification about the information being sought, suggesting issues such as final hearing dates, the defendants' names, and what the defendants were charged with. The officer eventually declined the request, saying that it would exceed the cost limit set out in the FOIA. Although we cannot answer your request at the moment, this is a quote, we may be able to answer a refined request within the cost limit. So here we have, from the court system, a request about Julian's judge, piggybacked with a request about a different judge. And the UK court, or the Ministry of Justice, is more than willing to help Curtis and Kennard on information sought about a district judge who has nothing to do with Julian's case. What does that say to you, my friend Andre?
So I think it's really similar to the way that they submitted the information or the complaint about Judge Abernathy and her involvement within the criminal case. And she didn't have to recuse herself. She didn't have to step back. All they did was just put a different face on the charade and kept her still in the decision-making position, essentially. So I think the way that they roll this out, it literally just shows that if you're requesting information that they think is benign and can't harm anyone, it can just come out. But if you're requesting information in regards to certain political matters, such as the end of the freedom of the press and the extradition of one of the most awarded journalists in the world, that gets a little heated, especially when it's the judge that's presiding over the case that you're trying to get information on. That answers directly to the U.S. prosecution and the United States people in the back.
And a 96% conviction rate basically makes the concierge of the U.S. State Department, Vanessa Breitzer, a hanging judge. That's what we would have called her in 1982. If you're a hanging judge, it doesn't matter what the evidence says. It doesn't matter what rights have been violated by your government on the part of whomever the defendant is. The only thing that matters is, essentially blood needs to be spilled or an example needs to be made. And several thousand years of human history has proven that this kind of thing isn't a deterrent for crime. So there's a sociopathic glee, I think, that comes with simply saying whoever comes into my courtroom is guilty. I don't care what the fuck the legal argument about this is.
And we've seen that over and over, because every time a request is put in, every time someone asks on Julian's defense team from something from her, whether it was allowing Julian to be released due to coronavirus, whether it was trying to get more time early on in the case, everything just came from pre-prepared statements where the defense would make an argument, they'd shuffle their papers around, the judge would read what Abernathy had written or someone had written for her to say that day, and that was that. So it's just disgusting to see it replicated over and over again, and even in her previous case records.
I'm trying to see if there's anything here left in the CN article that we really need to get out. So look, man, we talked about this a couple of times over the last few vigils, and that is the most wanted leaks list that WikiLeaks had put out like back in like 2010 or something like that. I think it's time to update that list. And I think that the particular items that, for example, Stefania is trying to obtain through Freedom of Information Act requests need to be a part of that most wanted leaks. If there are any people who are watching the vigil right now who are part of the hacktivist collectives that have done so much of the groundwork in bringing these things to light outside of the whistleblowers that have come forward, maybe consider that. I think that the way that the freedom of information process has been abused, and abused specifically when it comes to getting information that relates to Julian Assange or WikiLeaks or any of the outlets that have printed real shit. I think that abusive process has it should have put a little target on itself. But
and I want to give a big shout out, because there's a group, an anonymous collective out there. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing their name right. That's recently been going. It's Ghost Squad Hackers. That's recently been going around defacing state government pages throughout the United States, and putting up the message of free Julian Assange on them. Thank you. Like, I think that that's an important thing. I appreciate banner drops, and that's very much what I consider that. It's a very non-harmful, basically the same as putting a flyer up on a wall type of activism, regardless of the other things and structures and the way the system decides to try and view those things. So please protect yourself as much as possible. But I want to say thank you for that, because I think it is something that is important to do, and I think it is as much a part of activism as being a voice on the ground for this. So I know that's not the most popular opinion, but I want to just throw that out there and say I appreciate anyone taking any type of personal action and taking those calculated personal risks.
Where should we jump to in terms of, we got about 20-25 minutes left of the show. You're
I think
muted.
we should save the 10-year anniversary article for Tuesday, and we'll focus mostly on that. But I think we could pick up the number 2, the email about Belmarsh, because I think this is pretty interesting.
Okay.
The Insight Hound tweet.
Sure.
So this, let me just make sure I got the full right context here. Someone had reached out to Belmarsh Prison and the NHS authorities to figure out information about PPE in regards to Julian's case, and if he's being provided personal protective equipment and other such things. And Belmarsh, and they got a response from the NHS on this. So there's two different ones that it shows here, but I just want to read through the second one. It says, "Thank you for your email. We acknowledge your concerns about the safety of prisoners in relation to COVID-19. And whilst the specific issue of PPE for prisoners is best addressed by HMP Belmarsh, we would like to assure you that we have taken all measures in accordance with Public Health England guidelines for the protection of staff and patients, specifically the management of the healthcare unit within the prisons. We have worked with the prisons to ensure that where positive cases are identified, that they have suitably managed to limit the spread of the infection. Whilst there has been cases amongst the patients and staff, we are pleased to report that we have had no positive cases at HMP Belmarsh for a number of weeks. Which has been a position across London prisons. As you will understand, we are unable to get into specific detail relating to an individual's care and treatment without their express or explicit consent. However, we can confirm that our duty to ensure that individuals in custody have access to healthcare services that is broadly equivalent to what is available in the community. Should we have any concerns about this, we would raise with the prison and the NHS England. We hope this answered your query. So I just want to say, I hope that visitation opens back up, because if the prison has been free of corona, then there should be absolutely no reason why private meetings can't be held with Julian and with his lawyers and with his family members. So I think it is hypercritical that Julian's allowed to meet with these people, because we're almost there. We're a little over a month out from Julian's second round of rendition hearing. So it's been multiple weeks, apparently, according to the government itself. So let's hope that we see that start happening soon.
And 18 weeks since Julian was able to speak with his attorneys.
Yep, and it was 4 consecutive court trials right up until this very last one that Julian wasn't able to even appear because he was reported as unwell.
Well, and that's by Belmarsh's doctors. That's on the advice of Belmarsh's medical staff. That's not Julian saying, I don't think I should go to the video conference room unless I've got some sort of personal protective equipment on. That's the medical staff. And then the court compelled Julian to appear via video link, but didn't communicate that to Belmarsh, is the way that it was reported. Like, I mean, the shit show that this has become, the abject mockery of what a hearing or a trial or a case management, just procedural event inside a courtroom. This is why we're going to DC. This is why we're trying to get as many asses in the streets internationally as we possibly can. Like, this cannot be allowed to happen. I almost went full fucking Lebowski and
a
said,
decade ago,
"Aggression shall not stand," man. Almost.
4 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. In 2016, if they tried to arrest him for anything then, whether it was related to the current situation or not. And so it blows my mind to see the world in such a state of disarray and disengagement that something like this can even be allowed to happen. While there's a president that's like, I love the WikiLeaks, and while there's this underground movement of Daddy Trump's coming to save the world. So I just think it's particularly disgusting that we haven't seen this massive pushback, because it's something that literally at any other point in WikiLeaks' existence, the public would have overwhelmed them with support.
Well, I mean, it speaks to the success of propaganda and smear campaign over the last 4 years, and it speaks to uh, just how intimidated journalists have become. Instead of, like, this is the one time where being reactionary would actually help. You know what I mean? Like, instead of the vast majority of international journalists going, yeah, we don't want to lose our access to powerful people, or we don't want to lose our livelihood.
They also don't want to lose the money that they get from the government because of things. I think it's what HB 5141 that allowed for the US government to allocate millions upon millions of dollars specifically to journalistic institutions, which walked the line and featured information that the government wanted to promote, and they would pay those institutions to do it. And a few months after that bill passed, you saw essentially every retired CIA officer start sitting on the bench as CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, for that matter.
Well, they did that as a direct result of the 2012 NDAA, when the Smith-Mundt Act was basically thrown out the window, and propaganda was completely not just endorsed but legalized through the National Defense Authorization Act. Now think about that for a moment. The same bill that included indefinite detention of U.S. citizens as long as they fall under the umbrella of terror suspects also completely legalized propaganda. And yet, we've got, unfortunately, the majority of American news outlets and their consumers running around thinking not only is this a normal, natural thing, but it's the only thing that you should believe in terms of what gets discussed on the fucking news. Like, it pisses me off quite a bit.
I don't know what's happening on the other side of the warehouse right now, but I apologize if you guys heard that.
Are your raccoons fucking up?
No, it's not them. No, we're hiring more people, so the bosses have some people in to do interviews. So I apologize about the racket in the background, but I do work out of my office when I do the streams. So I really appreciate my company actually allowing me to use this space for this as well. But I think we have one last thing to cover. It is the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. The DHS intelligence reports on journalists covering the Portland protests are unacceptable. If we could get that popped up, Josh.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here real quick because this is a pretty interesting article. On July 30, the Washington Post and other outlets reported the U.S. Department of Homeland Security compiled intelligence reports about the work of American journalists from the New York Times and the blog Lawfare after they published unclassified documents about DHS operations while covering protests in Portland, Oregon. Gabe Rotman, Director of Technology and Press Freedom Project at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, made the following statement. News reporting on the Department of Homeland Security's response to the protests in Portland and elsewhere is undoubtedly in the public's interest, and targeting those journalists as the subject of an intelligence report is wholly unacceptable. Federal law prohibits the creation of dossiers on journalists precisely because doing so can morph into investigations of journalists for news coverage that embarrasses the government, but that the public has a right to know. DHS must take immediate steps to ensure this doesn't happen again, and we urge it to publicly release the findings of its inquiry into this incident. This is the second time in less than 2 years that a federal agency under the Trump administration has compiled intelligence information about journalists. In March 2019, the Reporters Committee also condemned the actions of the U.S. government agencies that created a list to track journalists covering immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border as well as attorneys, activists, and others who have done work at the border. That list included 10 journalists, some of whom reported having alerts placed on their passports for secondary screening, being detained and questioned about their work by border agents when trying to cross the border, and not being allowed to enter Mexico. The Reporters Committee, NBC7 San Diego, and its reporter Tom Jones, neat, have filed a federal lawsuit against 4 government agencies for refusing to turn over records about the secret government database in violation of the Freedom of Information Act. Here, y'all, this is what we've been screaming about for the last 56 weeks. This is the direct result of not nearly enough journalistic institutions screaming their bloody heads off about the persecution, torture, and upcoming prosecution of Julian Assange.
And it's also the failing of whatever spectrum of activist you are, because journalistic rights and foundational support for proliferating factual information has to come before anything else. Because if you can't share the video of police brutality, if you can't share the video of the war crimes, if you can't share the video of the mass pollution, then how does that information truly get reported if you aren't allowed to actually proliferate it and it becomes a crime simply possessing and sharing that information? So I think after we've seen 700 plus incidents of tear gas and mace and rubber bullets and assaults and arrests of journalists for, I don't know, since the beginning of June, hopefully this becomes an issue. Hopefully the freedom of press and the proliferation of information actually becomes part of the frontline conversation for activists. Because whether you're someone on the street that's trying to record what's happening to your friend, or you're someone that has the ability to create a in-depth, complicated website that allows people to submit information anonymously to expose war crimes, if one of those people can be gone after, so can the other. So I think it's hopefully finally driving home to the rest of the activist world that we need to stand up for these foundational rights, and that we can work to move towards a post-partisan future where we can accept sharing facts as something that needs to be done instead of something that becomes this strange fringe topic.
And on that, do you want to go ahead and wrap for the day? I got to get out of here anyway. I'm going to put shiny new lumber racks on my truck. They're not shiny or new.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was very interested in those lumber racks. Continue.
I'm stoked, man. I'm stoked.
We actually just got a couple new bands here, so I'm pretty pumped about that too. But either way, we have on our website, and I will put it in chat, an action for this week. We are asking people to contact their city councils. It's way easier than most people think, even though it actually sounds pretty easy as it is. So I'm going to put that link in chat. Literally just search for your city's website and then pull the information off of there. There's probably a couple email addresses. You're also looking for the clerk of the council and all the individual members, and just send them some information about Julian. There's an attachment of the motion that the Melbourne City Council passed. There's also an article that talks about all of the different city councils throughout Australia that are supporting Julian right now. So yeah, I really, really hope that people can do that, because in August, it will probably be the last city council meeting before Julian's extradition hearing. So if you can get that information out now and say, hey, I would like this as an emergency motion in the next city council meeting, and then appear there to scold them and hopefully find support at the same time. But with that, my name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. If you liked us and would like to support us, we do have a GoFundMe to go to DC right now for the 3-week rendition hearing of Julian. You can find us online at action4assange.com, and you can find this on Twitter at action_4Assange.
My name is Steve Poikinen, and I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find me by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. I'm also on the Rockfin and D Live. Tomorrow, I will be joined by Morgan Archikina from Sputnik, and I probably murdered her last name, but I'll find out. And Kevin Gastola will be with me for the second hour. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. It's been like independent journalist weekend, I guess. Should be a blast. Really look forward to you all joining me for that. I've said it before, but it's fucking true. I really do have the best audience and chat crew in YouTubedom. You guys fucking rock. So thank you for being a part of all of this with us. Thank you very, very much to the people who have donated to the GoFundMe. If you can, please do that and continue to do that. If you can't, then please share that link. Hopefully we can get it thrown into chat real quick one more time before we close out of here. And yeah, just, that lots of thanks to Stefania Maurizi for joining us today. She was phenomenal. And I hope that we can connect with her when we're in DC, because I know that she will be following the rendition hearing very closely. Thanks to Andre, my co-host, and Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos. And I will hopefully see most of you tomorrow on my show. Tuesday, we will be joined by Danny Shurson, and I'm not sure who else yet. I think we still have to work that out. But Danny will definitely be there. Always a good conversation with him. And until then, y'all, good luck to us all.